Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In part 1, we traced the roots of what has become a permanent war zone. We looked at King Leopold II's brutal rebel regime that cost 10 million lives, the CIA-backed assassination of independence leader Patrice Lumumba, and decades of devastating proxy wars. We explored the ground reality today, an eastern mineral belt where a weak state has left a vacuum filled by over 100 armed groups. We deconstructed how dominant rebel forces like M23, backed directly by Rwanda, use security arguments as cover to seize lucrative mining zones, while the DRC's own underfunded military also committed atrocities and left civilians completely unprotected. Ultimately, despite 30 years of peacekeeping and billions of dollars, the violence is actually accelerating because the territory sits on a geological scandal holding 70% of the world's cobalt and up to 80% of its coltan reserves and many other resources. Now, in part 2, we are turning to the international arena to understand how the 21st century energy race, the fierce resource war between the United States and China, and corporate interests are weaponizing the Congo's wealth, turning a clean energy transition into a bloody war. Let's begin. The conflict in eastern Congo connects directly to the smartphone in your pocket, the electric car in your street, and the great geopolitical competition of the 21st century. Cobalt is essential for lithium-ion batteries. Every electric vehicle, every smartphone, every laptop contains it. The global transition to clean energy, the goal of the Paris Agreement, the ambition of every climate policy in the developed world, requires a massive, sustained increase in cobalt supply. The DRC produces 70% of the world's cobalt. China controls approximately 80% of cobalt processing globally, through a series of acquisitions and long-term contracts that begin with a landmark 2009 deal with the Congolese government. When you buy an electric car made anywhere in the world, the battery almost certainly passed through Chinese processing at some point. This is what keeps Washington up at night. In February 2025, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi sent a letter to Donald Trump. The M23 had just captured Goma. The Congolese army was in retreat. Tshisekedi was desperate for support, and he made Washington an offer it couldn't refuse. Preferential access to DRC's critical minerals, cobalt, copper, coltan, lithium, gold, etc., in exchange for US political and security backing against Rwanda and M23. What followed was the Washington Accords. On June 27, 2025, the DRC and Rwanda signed a preliminary peace agreement in Washington mediated by the US. On December 4, 2025, Trump hosted both presidents in the Oval Office and announced a package of 5 agreements. A peace deal between the DRC and Rwanda, a regional economic integration framework between the two countries, a US-DRC strategic partnership agreement and US-Rwanda economic framework, and a security partnership memorandum of understanding. Trump was characteristically direct about what America got out of it. He said, and I quote, "I actually stopped the war in Congo and Rwanda, and they said, please, please, we would love you to come and take our minerals, which we'll do." Let's look at what "which we'll do" actually means in practice. The US-DRC Strategic Partnership Agreement grants American companies first access to Congolese mines up for sales. This is designed to block new Chinese investment. The DRC is required to designate a strategic assets reserve of mineral assets available for US. The DRC also committed to rerouting qualifying mineral exports through the Lobito Corridor, a US-backed railway from Congo's mining heartland through Angola to the Atlantic coast, wherever feasible, even where shorter or cheaper routes exist. The Edgemont Institute in Brussels reviewed the agreements and described the Lobito provision plainly. Washington has indirect influence over how Eastern Congolese minerals move through the region and into global markets. But the IIP Vienna analysis was harsher. Congolese policy choices on resources governance, export routes, and foreign investments are now tightly linked to the US geopolitical goals, leaving Kinshasa with limited choice to cooperate with other partners. As a result, the US Development Finance Corporation has issued letters of interest for $1 billion each on mining and infrastructure investments. Cobalt Metals, a US-based critical minerals company backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, is actively pursuing projects in Katanga. And after signing the strategic partnership agreement, the Congolese government issued a decree suspending artisanal mining processes centers. This is the informal operations that provide livelihood for hundreds of thousands of small-scale miners. It did so citing compliance with new transparency requirements, but without consulting affected communities or providing transition plans. Public Citizen, a non-profit consumer advocacy organization, called it immediately destabilizing for local mining economies. But the peace deal has not stopped the fighting. Rwandan troops have not yet really withdrawn as required. M23 continued to hold large swaths of territory. Fighting persisted in South Kivu, Ituri, and areas approaching the Burundian border. The DRC government accused Rwanda of violating the agreement, while Rwanda accused the DRC of continuing to support the DFLR. And the deal destroys the very idea of free competition, especially for other competitors like China. But realizing that the geopolitical landscape has become hyper-transactional following the 2025 Washington Accords, M23 leaders have compiled an exclusive slide deck pitched directly to the Trump administration. Corneille Nangaa, leader of the M23's political arm, stated that those minerals are in our region. Come, let's discuss. M23 argues that their control over eastern mining assets provide a more deliverable pathway to secure U.S. critical mineral supply chain than the weak national government in Kinshasa can offer. So they are actively inviting American corporations to the table to negotiate deals for the rare earth elements tin, tungsten, and tantalum under their control. M23's corporate outreach is born out of desperation. This move came as the Trump administration was increasingly siding with the DRC national government. The US has placed sanctions on Rwandan military, M23's backer, sanctioned former DRC President Joseph Kabila for allegedly assisting the rebels, and backed the deployment of private American military contractors to help the Congolese army retake rebel territory. Very recently, M23 has been pulling back from several key positions in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, including towns on the Ruzizi Plain like Sange and areas north of Uvira in South Kivu. This pullback follows heavy military pressure from the Congolese army and significant diplomatic pressure from Washington. Let's now look at China's response. Beijing was not going to simply accept displacement. Even as the Washington Accords were being signed, Kinshasa and Beijing announced a new bilateral deal that would entrench Chinese mining companies further in the DRC's critical minerals landscape. China's leverage is structural. It controls the processing infrastructure. Even if the US gained access to raw Congolese ore, and Chinese firms control 80% of the global capacity. This, of course, can be reversed, but it will take time to build this capacity. China is also Africa's largest investor, trader, and infrastructure financier. The Belt and Road Initiative has woven Chinese economic relationships deep into the continent. Washington can offer mineral deals and railway corridors. Beijing can offer all of that, plus no questions asked on governance and human rights. The DRC, with extraordinary mineral wealth and a desperate government, is now the prize in the great power mineral competition between Washington and Beijing. That competition is, for the Congolese people, a new version of a very old story. Rwanda is one of the most interesting and morally complex actors in the story. On the one hand, Rwanda in 1994 was the site of one of the worst genocides in human history, largely abandoned by the international community. The current Rwandan government, Paul Kagame's RPF, ended that genocide. The country has subsequently become one of the most remarkable development success stories on the continent, with strong institutions, low corruption, high literacy rate, and an economy that has grown consistently. On the other hand, Rwanda's involvement in the DRC has contributed to millions of deaths and participated in the systematic looting of a neighboring country's resources, operating through a series of proxy armed groups over 3 decades. The UN has documented it. The African Union has confirmed it. The evidence is overwhelming. These are two realities that are hard to reconcile. Kagame's government has genuine security concerns about the DFLR, some of whose leadership are literally genocide perpetrators, armed and living 30 kilometers away from the Rwandan border. Any government would consider that an existential threat. But security logic doesn't explain why Rwanda's mineral export revenues tripled while M23 controlled the coltan belt. It doesn't explain why Rwanda exports nearly 50 tons of gold annually despite having almost no domestic gold reserves. It doesn't explain why the UN documented that Rwanda's 2003 army had a dedicated Congo desk for large-scale illegal appropriation of Congolese resources. It doesn't explain why Rwanda allows M23 to sell resources extracted illegally and with the use of violence through its territory. Today, scholars use the term of sub-imperialism to describe Rwanda's role in the DRC. This term refers to smaller states that exploit regional power vacuums to drain resources from weaker neighbors. The broader system permits this because the resources ultimately flow to the global north. Rwanda is extracting and exporting at scale what the global economy needs, using a military proxy to maintain access. The Washington Accords committed Rwanda to withdrawing its troops. As of today, they have not really done so. The US, having signed the agreement, has applied pressure but not imposed costs. Rwanda has calculated, apparently correctly, that its usefulness as a regional partner and its government's remarkable development records gives it substantial diplomatic immunity. Because Kigali maintains an official stance of denial that its military is deployed in the DRC, they have not issued any order or statement regarding a formal troop withdrawal. Intelligence and human rights reports show that Rwandan soldiers operate embedded directly within M23 units. Therefore, the M23 recent pullback the Rwandan forces right alongside them. But they haven't packed up and gone back across the border to Rwanda yet. Instead, they are regrouping and consolidating in specific, heavily controlled strongholds in eastern DRC. It seems to be less of a departure from the country and more of a tactical step back to appease the US and avoid heavier sanctions. Now, another angle that doesn't get enough coverage is how the resource war is reshaping Congolese domestic politics. President Félix Tshisekedi took office in 2019 in a disputed election that many observers believe was effectively negotiated between the outgoing Kabila and the opposition rather than won at the ballot box. He has spent his presidency consolidating power, breaking with Kabila, and using the Eastern conflict as both a political resource and a justification for authoritarian moves. In 2021, his government launched formal corruption investigations into Kabila and his allies. It pushed Kabila into exile in South Africa in 2023. On September 30, 2025, a military court sentenced Kabila to death in absentia for treason, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and sexual assault, torture, and insurrection, allegedly for collaborating with M23. His parliamentary immunity had been revoked by a not-so-independent Senate. He was not present at the trial and had no representation by legal counsel. This matters not because Kabila is necessarily innocent. His 18-year rule was marked by persistent human rights abuses, corruption, and election rigging, but because the process was nakedly political. The DRC lifted its moratorium on the death penalty shortly before the trial. The sentence was issued in absentia, without legal representation, by a military court against a political rival who had just publicly criticized the president during an existential national security crisis. Tshisekedi has also continued the government's crackdown on independent media and civil society. The 2026 World Report of Human Rights Watch noted that the government's crackdown on the opposition and the media continued, exacerbated by tensions in the East. Civic and media space remained restricted. Journalists and activists were targeted by both the Congolese authorities and the M23 and AFC. The Congolese government has been using this war against M23 to justify domestic repression, and it has been offering the country's mineral wealth to the United States as the price of international support for both. But the main price of all of this is paid by ordinary Congolese people. 8.2 million people were displaced as of September 2025, projected to reach 9 million by the end of 2026. This is roughly the population of Togo, forced from their homes. 90% of them are in North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri, the mineral belt. 26.6 million people, a quarter of the entire Congolese population, face acute food insecurity as of January 2026. Not food scarcity, acute insecurity. This is defined as hunger that threatens lives or livelihoods. More than 4 million aged 6 to 59 months are suffering or expected to suffer acute malnutrition. 1.35 million children suffer from severe malnutrition, requiring urgent treatment. When Goma fell to M23 in January 2025, over 400,000 people were immediately displaced. M23 subsequently ordered tens of thousands of people in displacement camps around the city to evacuate within 72 hours. In South Kivu, verified cases of grave violation against children surged by 150% between December 2024 and March 2025. These include sexual violence, massacres, maiming, and forced recruitment. The miners working in mining sites have no safety equipment, no insurance, no protection. They are mining the minerals that power the green transition, dying in tunnels that collapse around them in territory controlled by a Rwanda-backed rebel group. Cholera, measles, and mpox have moved through displacement camps where water coverage falls below 20% in some areas, and where hospital capacity has been partly destroyed or overwhelmed by conflict casualties. The overall situation is very grim, and I encourage you to look further into the humanitarian situation there, notably the use of sexual violence as a weapon in the war to destroy communities and get women ostracized. Using a neo-Marxist lens here, which in international relations focuses on the exploitation of the periphery by the core. And while the name stems from Karl Marx's study of capital in modern international relations, this neo-Marxist lens has nothing to do with 20th century political regimes. It is simply a framework used to track how global wealth is structurally drained from poor nations to the rich ones. And there is an argument that the green transition, as currently structured, reproduces the same extractive relationship between the global north and the global south that has always existed, with a new rhetorical wrapper. So what is the conclusion today? Well, the Washington Accords have put pressure on Rwanda, M23, and other groups to reduce their activity. But this was negotiated in exchange for further access by the US of the country's natural resources. Resources that could be used to develop the country and help increase the living standards of the population. Instead, it continues to be captured by external actors. The humanitarian situation remains bleak, and even if the war was totally stopped today, the human consequences will perdure for generations most likely. So what could actually help? Genuine enforced supply chain transparency, real, independent tracing of every mineral from mine to market. If consumers and corporations could not buy cobalt from M23 controlled mines, the economics of the conflict would shift dramatically. There could also be real enforceable conditions on Rwanda's continued mineral export revenues, making it economically painful to sustain M23 operations rather than profitable. Adding to that a genuine share of processing in the DRC itself. Every ton of cobalt that leaves the DRC and is processed in China or elsewhere is value that the DRC never captures. Investments in local industries and a commitment to Congolese economic sovereignty go a long way, but the lack of security and an autocratic regime and low interest make this scenario unlikely. Can the rush to the DRC's resources bring more stability now, or will it continue to further escalate tensions? That question in 2026 does not have a comfortable answer. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video interesting, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you very soon in the next video.